Good evening. My name is Nihal Arthanayake, and I'm a radio presenter, and I do a show here at Media City between the hours of 1 and 4, Monday to Thursday. Now, the reason that we're here today is to talk about something very, very important, which is grief, because there is nobody who will, unfortunately, be not touched by grief at some point in their life. I have been, and all my guests have been as well. And also, of course, it's a year where more people than ever have had to understand what that feels like. You know, I certainly have, having lost one of my closest friends in December of last year to COVID. So grief and loss is something that we all have to understand we will come across. And the question is how do we process it? How do we deal with it? How does it affect us? How do we, I guess, stop ourselves from drowning in it? Now, I should mention that on our website, we will have signposts to organizations that can help with bereavement and other aspects of mental health. So if you are struggling, please do reach out for help. Also, we will have talk with about it with a free system which you can sign up for on the Wellbeing Live Facebook page. Now, I'm going to introduce our guests now. Firstly, an actor famous for many roles, Coronation Street being one of them, Dinner Ladies being another one of them. And she recently appeared on Best Celebrity Home Cook. Interesting. Shobna has written a book that I've read and interviewed her about, actually, about nursing her mother through dementia. Remember Me, Discovering My Mother as She Lost Her Memory is an extraordinary book. And look, you now understand why Shobna is here with us today. Shobna Gulati, hello.
Hi.
Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you in your own version of Tate Modern.
Yes, this is my creative corner. This is where I've done all my Zooms since the beginning of our pandemic lockdown. And and this is where I wrote my book. It's my little space. I sort of play the piano here, and I can also got a little tiny piano there. And I write on this end of the dining table because the other end of the dining table is full of paper.
Okay, this is rejected scripts that weren't good enough for you.
No, it's just I write a lot, so I write it all on bits of paper and then I put them over there and then pick them up when I want to.
Well, we'll definitely ask questions about writing and other pursuits that help you deal with the darker elements of our life in a moment. Next up is a TV presenter, radio broadcaster, podcast creator, footballer, and life coach, qualified life coach, best-selling author as well, of the Grief Survival Guide, none other than Jeff Brazier. Hello, Jeff.
Yeah, how are you?
Good to see you. You're at the Home Gothic Library.
It's quite dark, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Listen, this room, again, like Shobna, it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the pandemic. Small positives. This is my little study, and I get some powerful inspiration from this little room. So I'm glad that it used to be the kids snug. They are now snugless. They didn't really ever need it anyway. So it's much better as a little office for me.
Well, they're 18 and 17, are they? 18, 16?
Yeah, I lose track. They're both hovering above me. It's obscene. Makes me feel slightly old, slightly small, but I'm still clinging in there.
Well, look, it's great to have you here as well. Rosena Allin-Khan is with us as well, Shadow Minister for Mental Health, also a practicing A&E doctor and a working mother, whose father sadly passed away just last month. So thank you so much, Rosena, for coming on, considering, of course, your grief is the most recent of all of ours. So thank you so much. And also thank you for all the work you do in the NHS as well. Oh my gosh, in a very difficult year.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate being on today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And I'm really hoping you're not going to ask me about my messy living room, because I feel slightly overwhelmed by the incredible backgrounds of the other two guests, Shobna and Jeff. And I'm like, please do not ask me about my living room. It's a mishmash of my birthday cards, the piano with the kids' music on it, and a lot of mess that you can't see in front of me.
So, okay, wait a minute, but let's get, whoa, you can't just drop birthday cards into it. When was your birthday?
Last week.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday. Another lockdown birthday with people waving at you in Zoom, presumably.
Yeah, it was another lockdown birthday, but what I did manage was I decided I was going to do a meal with 6 of us yesterday when the rules allowed. So actually it was wonderful. I had my besties with me and managed to actually go out, and I felt like I had a life for 5 minutes. It was brilliant.
I know. It's amazing. Well, look, thank you all three of you for joining us. Now, look, let's get into this conversation as quickly as possible. Shobna, for you, writing the book, how did it help you process, seeing the words, your feelings in words? How did that help you process grief?
I've always tried to unburden the things that I feel about life by writing them down. So this was the next stage of it. And I suppose that writing down is usually something I just don't share very much. It was the process of sharing the book that has really helped me and was really cathartic. My experience of love, loss, life, I wanted to share it and to have it resonate with people. And as you know, Mum had dementia, and I thought it would be important to talk about the incremental losses that you feel as you're caring for somebody who has that, and how you support them in that, as well as how you support yourself. So I kind of wanted to share those ups and downs, the joys and the loss. And yes, it did help me come to terms with losing her. And I feel like, there's much more to write still. Of course there is, there always is. But I wanted to capture that moment in time to help others see that they weren't alone.
Sharing it, that's interesting, that writing it down was something you were used to doing in terms of your feelings. How did the sharing of it help?
I think sharing helps because one of the ways that I write is that I hear it back. I actually read it out to myself. That's how. And I think in hearing it, it was almost like there was another voice present for me, where I didn't feel alone in the process. And then when it went out into the world and I had all that feedback from people who had read it, it felt I was in a good place with it, in a good place with the experience I had, because I think there's a lot of stigma that surrounds grief, loss, dementia, and I think the way to overcome stigma is to keep the conversation going.
I think that's a really good point, and that's where I was going to take the question in with Jeff, actually, about that issue that Shobna brings up, about the taboo of talking about it and choosing, Jeff, who you can and can't speak to it about, Jeff.
It's really interesting how grief has changed in terms of the expression. When you imagine in the last 10, 15 years, people have been able to grieve openly on social media. It wasn't necessarily something available to anyone before. And I would say any form of sharing is obviously an expression that is going to ultimately relieve you of that build-up of trauma. Now, don't get me wrong, it tops itself back up again a day or two later. But if we can, through my own experiences and for obviously helping the children with their grief, if we can just let that pressure off when and as it occurs, then actually we feel like we probably navigate our way through it slightly better, slightly smoother than we might. Don't get me wrong, it's still obscene, of course, but if we are someone that suppresses how we feel, we don't feel like we've got an outlet and we haven't established a security network, support network around us, then we're going to typically find it harder as a result, because the more you bottle up, it's like that pressure cylinder, the metaphor for that, really, that just builds up. When it gets up to there, it has nowhere to go, but all of a sudden it starts to influence and affect all aspects of your life, where it has the right to, but it doesn't necessarily need to.
Because it's difficult for us to sometimes gauge, Jeff, who it is that is going to be ready to listen to us, because we don't want to burden other people with those feelings. How do we overcome that?
Yeah, we talk ourselves out of it a lot. I think we're really good at actually justifying the wrong kinds of behaviours, and that's just fear. It's understandable, but if we're getting into, you know, what helps and what doesn't, if you are actually restricting yourself and limiting yourself to keeping it within, then, as I say, you're just carrying all that weight. I think the point of, you know, almost like that unwritten contract between friends and family members is that we're there for each other when things are great, and we'll congratulate you. We'll be there on your birthdays. We'll send you cards and we'll tell you well done. However, there's the other side of that. And that is that when life gets real and the stuff hits the fan, then actually that's when we really need to stand there and support one another. And, you know, a lot of people worry about, well, how do I best support? Well, I've always said there's no magic sentence that we can speak or articulate that's going to make people instantly feel better. That doesn't exist. It's impossible. But if we just apply our ability to listen, then that is always the place to start, and that is always going to help someone. Let them get it off their chest. There doesn't need to be a solution. The actual solution is the unburdening in that moment by you just listening and just holding what it is, holding space for that person.
Rosena, I mean, we can talk about your own personal experience of this, and we will later on, but you are in the even more precarious position in many ways of being surrounded by grief at work at times as well, which we're not. So how has it been, you know, this country's been to, being an A&E doctor? How have you coped with that, seeing that grief?
So the honest answer is I've found it incredibly difficult. I've been a doctor for 15 years, and I've also spent a huge chunk of my career, over a decade, working as a humanitarian aid doctor. So I thought I'd seen it all, you know, war and genocide and all the very worst of things. And even as a doctor, particularly as an A&E doctor, you see some really tragic circumstances, people losing babies, children, parents, everything. But nothing could have quite prepared me for the experience working through the pandemic. And I worked in A&E, but I also worked in intensive care as part of something called the Family Support Liaison Team, where a group of doctors who were quite experienced of dealing with grief, of which I was one of them, actually not doctors and nurses, were brought together to be the point of contact for families and their loved ones who were plugged into ventilators. So we were breaking bad news on a daily, telling people that the person they loved the most in the whole world had died, or that they were about to die. We were having people coming to the hospital and having to choose one person out of a family of 5 or 6 to go and be the one to go and say goodbye, and then taking those people to the bedside and doing that in full PPE, completely dehumanizing the normal process of putting your arm on someone or giving them a hug if they need it. It was incredibly stressful, but also what I found, I think, the most difficult throughout the second wave of the pandemic was taking the iPads, where people would join on a Zoom call, and you would take the iPad to the bedside and you would speak to the family and say, right, I'm gonna now turn the iPad to your loved one so you can talk to them. And hearing the family's conversations with their loved one, I thought I was pretty hard, to be honest, as in I could cope with a lot, but I was in tears at times. And there's one story that will never ever leave me, which was 3 children under 6 shouting at their mum, who was 27 years old, on a ventilator, having the discussion between themselves, saying, let's shout really loud in unison, because if we do that, mummy might wake up. And they're shouting, mummy, wake up. You've been asleep too long now. Come home. And having to find that strength to turn around and say to these children, oh my goodness, we could all feel your love in here. Your mummy could feel your love, and you're so amazing. I mean, that I found it very difficult to navigate emotionally. And this isn't about me and how I dealt with it. But I think just to sort of point out and say that, what people went through, and I know we're going to touch on it later, but what those families went through, I think as well, not being able to be there and support their loved one. I mean, I had somebody who moved from Manchester to London, even though she wasn't allowed to visit. She moved city just to feel she was closer to her sister. And what that does to you, relaying those messages every day and passing on that expectation and those messages of, Dad, hold on, the grandkids want to see you. It eats away a bit more every day, and you come home and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is pretty crippling for everyone involved. And for the healthcare workers involved, I know as a matter of fact that it hugely impacted people's mental health, plus also seeing their own colleagues catching COVID, plus coming home and telling the kids, mine were 5 and 6, and at the time they've just turned 6 and 8, and it's like telling them that they can't come to the door to hug me because I'm paranoid I'm going to give them COVID, and just stop taking all my clothes off and running in the shower. So it was difficult. It was a challenge. But we all in the NHS, we're an incredible bunch at all levels, whether we're porters, cleaners, doctors, nurses, carers. We're all equal, and we all stepped up, and I couldn't be more proud to stand alongside the people that I did, and everybody did their bit, and we just did the best we could.
At the risk of stereotyping, Rosena, do different cultures grieve in different ways? Are there cultural aspects to grief?
Yes, I would answer that in the context of what I know as a doctor with regards to acute grief, and different family groups from different cultures deal with news in different ways, and there is no right and wrong. It is just about what people feel they can do at that time. So there are some cultures who feel that they very overtly can demonstrate that they are very vocal in their grief. So they might arrive to the emergency department and their loved one is dying or sick, and they may be very vocal, and they may collapse to the floor and wail, and that is their way of demonstrating how they feel. Other people will feel they have to stay very firm and very strong because they've got to hold it together for the family, and if they show any emotion, they're letting other people down. And there is no right and wrong, and you also don't know what you're going to do, because some of the people that you would expect to have that stiff upper lip and try and hold it all together, sometimes you see them, sorry to sound depressing, but you see them climbing onto the bed next to the person that's passed away and just holding on to them, crying. And I think as professionals and as people, as humans, we just have to understand that there is no right and wrong, and we have to really go easy on ourselves, because I can tell you from my first-hand experience, you don't know what you're going to do, you don't know how you're going to be, and it doesn't matter. None of it matters. All that matters is that, as Jeff said, you share it, and as Shobna says, you find ways to articulate it that make you feel better. And it doesn't matter whether anyone else passes judgment on what's right or wrong and goes, oh yes, it's someone from that culture, they're plastered to the floor again. We have to be really understanding that grief is so all-consuming, and it's only once we've lived it ourselves, truly lived it ourselves, that we can understand what someone goes through. And my plea to anybody watching would be, whatever way you do it is the right way. It's just the way that is okay for you.
Yeah, no, for sure. Shobna, when your mother was diagnosed with dementia, knowing, of course, the inevitable, how do you begin to prepare for the inevitable over a period of time you don't know how long it or short it's going to be? How do you even map that out psychologically?
Well, I couldn't, to be absolutely honest with you, I couldn't map it out psychologically at all. I didn't know what to do. I think in the beginning, just like my mum went through a process of denial about her condition, I denied it as well in my head. I didn't want it. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to see it, because that incremental loss, it's so cruel. It feels so cruel. It almost feels, and I know it's happening to the other person, but when you are in the moment of caring, in that little cocoon, it feels so personal. And I couldn't get over that for a while, and I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to, share those feelings. And I think I had to accept, I suppose, there's a fear about death, isn't there? If that's the inevitable thing that's going to happen to us all at some stage, I suppose with dementia, it fast forwards it. The understanding that that's going to happen, because at some point we will lose our parents, we will lose those around us. We all know that is inevitable. We will die. But it is the terror. The terror was overwhelming. And I suppose when I began to accept that she was on that journey, I felt that it was so important to sort of not only just care for her physical needs, but start to care for her spiritual needs and talk to her about how she saw things, and how we broached the subject of dying. And I know it's a strange thing to say, but I felt that we had to have those conversations and keep those conversations open, so that preparation also helped me spiritually. Because there's a lot of things you can do to care for a person actually. You can make sure that they take their tablets. You can make sure that they're comfortable and warm and safe. And you share and you're happy and there's caring. But I think one of the things that I experienced right early on in my life was I lost my father at 19. Well, no, at 18. And I was given a book about a Buddhist book, and I didn't really understand it then at 19, but at 50 plus now that I am, I began to understand what it meant, and it was about sort of going on that journey that's slightly outside of myself, a slightly esoteric, and going into a sort of spiritual way and talking about death. And I know it's a really hard thing to do, but it kind of lifted the fear and the terror that I was experiencing, and hopefully it helped my mum too.
Jeff, with Rosena, I talked about culture, but with you, I'd like to talk about gender, because you have two boys who lost their mother, and men find it very difficult to talk about our feelings. So how did you speak to your boys about that? About a perennial problem for us men. We've seen male suicide rates actually go up. And that's actually, I don't think we have statistics in from the last year, but I know in 2019 they were going up. How did you have those conversations, Jeff?
I think on reflection, I would have said at the time that I was completely open to having whatever conversations the boys needed, and that I was determined to be whatever version of myself I needed to be in order to cope with the situation. I think I had a lot of positivity about my approach and what I was going to be able to do, because I think that's how I've got myself through life generally. What I've realised sort of later on is that actually you can be too positive, and that really what you're doing is blocking the balance of all things that you really need to navigate that situation as well as you possibly can. However, I think, I became a hybrid version of what you'd imagine is between a male and a female. And, whenever people would say, oh, you're mum and dad, I think that never felt right, because I don't think you can ever become mum, because that job was taken and that will always belong to Jade. And all I could do was try and fulfill the needs that a father wouldn't typically always provide. It's not possible to do that entirely. And I think there is an acceptance that comes part way down the path where you realise that, I just can't add that mothering touch. And, you know, it's always sad to imagine that that's something that we don't like to feel limited or powerless or helpless. But again, there's nothing like death to literally, you know, bring that literally in front of your face and say, well, actually, you are. So what do? We control the controllables. We be the best version of ourselves that we can. Since I've learned to embrace the positive and the negative and the balance of all things, I think that actually what I've been able to provide the kids is at least sufficient for me. I feel like I can look at myself in the mirror and say, do you know what, you had a really good go at that. And I think the fact that they're in one piece is still probably my biggest success. But otherwise, in terms of that stereotypical man still isn't very good at being able to say, do you know what, I feel a bit low today, or I'm struggling because of the loss of. And, you know, I think that the reason I speak about mental health a lot is, and grief, and always actually, you know, really enjoy speaking about the subject, is simply because I want to show men in particular, as well as anybody, that talking is actually how you get through it in the best possible way. Whereas you can make things really difficult for yourself if you have embroiled yourself in the culture of, you know, bottling things up.
Rosena, for you then, because this is recent for you, losing your father, I mean, I can imagine, and you were nodding your head along in agreement, listening to what Shobna was saying, you know, you're still very much in it. How is it your grief manifesting itself now?
Oh, that's a big question. It's different on different days. And I think it's important as well at this point to acknowledge, because I think we have to have really honest conversations, that people's journey in life with their parents or a partner or someone who they lose isn't always a streamlined, straightforward, wonderful, rosy journey. And it wasn't in my case. And so for me, if I'm really honest, I am grieving many things. And I'm very honest about saying that. For me, I am grieving a relationship I didn't have. I'm grieving a relationship that I did have that was bad at many times, very bad, but that I ultimately was able to see made me who I am today. And then when I made my peace and had that realization, I was at a point where I was losing my father to dementia. So then I felt robbed of the relationship that I could have finally had, and watched him slip away in a very painful way, because he had a rare form of dementia that meant that he couldn't talk properly. So I had found it in my heart to forgive, and had to accept that there were things I was never going to hear that I might have needed, any person would have needed to hear in order to fully transform themselves from the person they were or the things that they'd gone through. So I kind of went on a journey, if I'm really honest, of finding forgiveness and understanding without ever hearing things that I would have needed to hear, but ending up with a relationship that was so beautiful, where nothing needed to be said. And it was very spiritual, and it was very caring. And I realized that the whole journey to unconditional love that I was meant to understand in my life was going to come through the journey with my dad. And then going through the loss, through the dementia, through not being able to see him properly through the lockdown period, and singing from the side of the road to his care home in the hope that he'd not feel forgotten. And then the brutal 7 weeks in the hospital, and then finally get him back to his care home, which he fought to get back to, where he was able to say goodbye to the kids and we were able to be with him as he passed. All of these things go around my head on a daily basis. And I, you know, if I'm honest, I should talk to someone about it professionally, really, because there are many layers to my grief. But I'm also grateful. I'm so grateful that I managed to find a place in my heart that means I will be able to reflect upon everything in a very beautiful way, and a very transformational way. And so there are some days where you can see the beauty of it all and the relationship that I had with my dad at the end. And there are other days where I'm so all consumed with grief that I spend as much of the day as possible doing MMA and martial arts and boxing that I really love, because in that moment where I'm concentrating on breathing and sparring and being exhausted, I don't have to live in the painful existence that is my grief. And that is the honest answer.
Shobna, is there any anger in your grief?
Yeah, I think there is. I think one of the ways that I define my grief is I wrote this down, so I'm going to read you what I wrote. It's the longing for what could have been different. It's exactly what Rosena said, in a sense that you grieve something that you could have had. And without that person there to have it with, now you think of that loss. You think of that, whatever that was in the relationship with your loved one that you were having. You think about the times that could have been different. And that's when my grief becomes an angry grief. But it's kind of like I try and take off that coat, because as Rosena says and as Jeff says, it's about, in the end, it is about love. And it's how you look at love and how you accept that you give love or share love with somebody. And in understanding that, it's what my friend said to me today, actually. My friend said to me, grief can be there, but it can't take away what you've had, you know, and that keeps me going. And I just think, just thinking that in my head, whatever I shared is valid. Whatever I shared, my relationship with my mum was pretty tricky as well. So it kind of, and things were always left unsaid, you know, things that are in, let's say, Western societies, very easily accessible. Everybody can talk about love. But interestingly enough, nobody talks about death. So there's all sorts of ways that I find myself, you know, to stop being angry. I accept that I am sometimes, and I accept that, you know, it'll make me throw things around and be frustrated with myself. But at the end of the day, it's an acceptance of it, you know. There's no stages of grief. You know, you don't suddenly angry and then you're suddenly sad and no, it just occurs in whatever emotional system or capacity that you've got in yourself. And I just have to understand that that's just a part of it. But I can't replace that. I can't control anything like that. I just have to accept that that's a part of me in my journey.
Jeff, and I'll come back to Rosena in a minute about this question of anger. What about anger?
For me, yeah, I suppose, you know, I can think of the losses. So my dad, I never met, biological father, he was the skipper of the Marchioness, which most people are aware of. So there is maybe an anger at the fact that, again, you know, I can't miss what I didn't have, but there's absolutely a void. I've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about that one, and there is a void where something should have been. You know, and I would always love to have found out what my relationship with my dad would have been like, and actually what would the difference be in me. You know, what version of 42-year-old Jeff am I now, given the fact that I didn't have that relationship or didn't have the ability to reflect myself, project myself within him. With regards to the boys, you know, they were robbed ultimately of what they are entitled to and what the majority of people get to enjoy right up until later on in their life. So yeah, I think if you wanted to focus on that, there's bitterness there. But who do you aim it at now? It's a blameless scenario. Not always, you know, sometimes there are obviously circumstances whereby there is an outlet. And, you know, that's tricky. No grief is the same. It's completely unique given the relationship you had with that person and given the time that you lost them and under the circumstances at which you lost them. So there really is absolutely no way you can offer a one-size-fits-all explanation to any of it. But it's wonderful hearing you two describe yours. Anyone listening to this would just be like, the majority of people I've found in being, you know, a grief coach, and most of my clients have been bereaved over the years, is that you end up realizing that people just want to know that they're doing it right, or that where they are in grief is not abnormal, or not a place that is particularly, you know, they're not off track, if you like. And everyone gives such a different account of it. And I just want people to know that it really is unique to you. The one thing that I would say with regards to where we can find ourselves going in a slight tangent is that I've always described it how, say like there's the cocktail of grief, if you like. Half of that will be what is naturally likely to occur, in that something that we'll all share in terms of feeling angry one minute, happy the next, you know, feeling like, you know, comfort, you know, straight after that, and not necessarily hitting the same stations on the same train line, if you like. Then the other half of it is actually the things that we add to it unwittingly a lot of the time, you know, whether it's resentment, blame, guilt, the pointing of fingers, whether it's that we actually are someone that was already kind of pre-programmed before we even experience grief to take the loss in a certain direction, in that some people have a tendency to self-sabotage, if you like. So they'll keep replaying certain aspects of it because it sort of serves their coping strategies some form of purpose. Other people have maybe a healthier attitude in that they're looking to be kind to themselves. They're looking to not necessarily make it any harder. It's fascinating how you can sit down with over 100 people and everyone just deal with it in a completely different way. But as I say, it's really interesting that some people have the ability, and I think we can just compound it into some people have the ability to be kinder to themselves through that process. Some people actually less so. So it's worth looking out for that.
It's really interesting what you're saying. I once interviewed Sir Billy Connolly and asked him about his father, who was incredibly abusive to him. And he said that as part of his therapy, one of the things that he did, or he was asked to do, was to sit in front of an empty chair. Imagine his father was in that chair and ask him why he did what he did to him. And then for Billy to go and sit in that chair, imagine himself as his father, and try and answer some of those questions. And he said, you know, anger was like a rucksack full of rocks that he carried around until he did that, which was not an attempt to justify what his father did, but an attempt to find some kind of understanding. Rosena, anger. Is your anger basically focused on whoever you're sparring with?
Do you know what? I wouldn't say I'm angry. Wouldn't say I'm
Really?
angry. No, I'm not angry. And I think that comes from a journey that I've been on over the last few years, because you know, so I'm a politician, and I had no plans to be a politician. And so when it all happened, it was a bit sudden, and I found myself thrust into a world that wanted to put me in the box, in a box, and rip me apart for no good reason, whether it be because I was a half Polish, half Pakistani, Muslim woman, whatever reason. There were people who just didn't like the fact that I existed, and very quickly it lays you bare. And unless you find ways to discover your inner gangster, and love yourself and go on a journey of self-love and self-acceptance, you can't survive something like that and have good mental health. And so actually I think a personal journey that I went on myself prepared me for everything that was to come with my dad. And I understood before my dad died that fundamentally everything that happened in my life happened for me to be the person I am today, to be the person that campaigns for people's rights, to be the person, you know, to be the voice that I am for people that don't have one. And so because I'd already been on that journey, I think I was in a good position to face what I was facing. So I feel sad, and I feel, I mean, if I feel angry, it's directed at how COVID situation was managed, which meant I couldn't see my dad for a year. That makes me really angry, but that's a different conversation. So I feel sad that I was robbed of that year where I couldn't see him, hold him, hug him. But I feel grateful. I feel so grateful that I was able to be with him at the end, when most of the families that I dealt with were not able to be there. And because I'm such a glass half full person, right now it's the positives that is pushing me through everything that feels difficult. And I've come to understand that everything that happens in my life happens for a reason, that somehow, however hard it is to wade through that treacle, ultimately makes me more knowledgeable, makes me wiser, makes me better, stronger somehow, so I can be better and stronger for others. So I'm hoping, because it feels really rough right now, I'm hoping this is another one of those things. So I'm not feeling angry. I am feeling as grateful as I can, but accepting that some days I feel incredibly, incredibly sad.
Shobna, the last days of your mother's life, tell us about the choices you made as you knew the end was coming.
I'm all the time that I did spend with Mum in her room, in that little room that we spent time together in, I felt that I began to understand her very viscerally, and so almost inside out. And in the last days of her death, her dying, she had had a stroke. So she said very, very little by then. And what she did say, she really chose to say. And because I was involved in caring for her food a lot, this was my role was often to cook for her. I gave her an ice cream. Her favourite was a mini milk. And she said to me, she said quite clearly, she'd chosen to say nothing else to me except, "Why are you feeding me?" She was ready to stop eating, to finish with that. And I knew that that's what she was saying to me. She wasn't saying, "Why are you feeding me? I can feed myself," which was something that she'd said to me often. I can do it, I can do it. It was a different, "Why are you feeding me?" And it was very clear to me that she was ready. And I come from a bigger family. I have three other siblings. I have 2 older sisters and 1 younger brother. And my big sister had been away and was travelling from India to be at my mum's bedside because everybody knew it was coming. Me and my sister don't get on, my big sister and I felt that I needed to give her the space with Mum. And I know that sounds a bit strange, but I'd had all the time with my mum. I'd had all this time and I'd filled it and I'd loved it. And I knew that she needed time. My big sister needed time. So I went. And I didn't want the sort of uncomfortability around my relationship with my sister to be in the room, if you like. I just wanted it to be a free space. So I shared that moment with Mum. I said goodbye and I left. And then in the night, early hours of the morning the next day, there was a point within that time where I felt really strongly. It was like I could feel her go. And then within a minute, my brother phoned me and said, "Mum has passed." And I said, okay. I kind of felt this overwhelming sense of relief for her, for me, for us, for everybody, that she had come to this point. And it felt so visceral. I can't even begin to tell you. The relief was overwhelming. And for the first time, I slept. I slept for what seemed like hours, but might have only just been 1. And we said goodbye. We said everything that we needed to say by then. We shared everything. We talked about death. We talked about life. We'd done all of those things because I was very conscious after the fear and the terror of not wanting her to go anywhere, that I'd come to accept it, and accept it as part of her life would always be her death. Part of my life will always be my death. So I got to that stage. It took a long, long time, but I was pleased to get there. And you know, the next day I had to wake up, and I did a comedy. I recorded a radio comedy, 6 episodes of a radio comedy, and it felt right because everything that I've ever done in my life has been that way. And that's my mechanism. Whenever I have been in some traumatic situation, I've had my job to take me to somewhere else, and that has really, really helped me. You know, I was taught a long time ago in order to be outside of yourself is to go into some other kind of place. And I was lucky enough to have a job to go to do that on that day. And I was pleased, and I kind of knew that my mum was pleased as well. I don't know whether she was or not, but that kind of comforted me. I didn't feel any regret, remorse, or anything. She told me she was ready. So I'm not one for demonstration. I can't do that. It's not, you know, maybe it's being an actor. I have to demonstrate a lot. So in my life, I can't do that. So I had to let her go. I had to. It felt like the right thing to do. And I don't know who said that or how it happened. It just happened.
Jeff, how do you think this last year and the fact that every night we have been confronted on the news with cases and deaths, if there is anything that we can see out of this that could be regarded as a positive, do you think it could be the fact that we may as a society become better at talking about death and grief?
I think we're going to end up with a huge backlog of mental health issues to look after people, and I think that it's affected all of us. I've had wobbles. I think it's pretty common that the most of us will feel that this transition out of lockdown and into whatever this is right now has just been nothing short of odd. So I think that we're going to really, it's vital, in fact, that we all start having conversations about our mental health. Obviously, grief is something that very often gives us no choice but to express it. Not that it's expected of us, but we kind of know that that's what brings the family together. Now, when you was asking the question now, my first thought is actually, well, what we're going to have to do is give anyone who's lost anyone in the last 12 months the recognition that they deserve, because I honestly feel like the people losing loved ones being turned into numbers, and whilst there was probably a good reason for those statistics being presented on a daily basis, it became a little bit inhumane. And I can only imagine that people have been caused pain, not just by the loss, but by that addition as well. I think there's no good time or good way to lose anyone, but I think that there have been a few additional layers in the last 12 months that absolutely needs to be recognised. So in terms of what impacts has the last year made on us, I think we just need to support each other in a way that we always used to, this is just the modern thing and we're going to have to kind of open up more and we need to talk. And yeah, I'm not sure if I'm really ready for that. And that's a bit too modern for me. No, it's not an option anymore. Now it's an absolute necessity, in my opinion.
Yes, I'm sure, Rosena, you would agree with that as well. We've had a number of comments coming in from the audience. Charlotte Lamb said, I lost my dad 3 weeks ago and we were estranged. It's hard to know how to feel. Another one saying, a lot of what Rosena says resonates. My wife passed away 6 weeks ago, and then my daughter gave birth 4 days later. So I feel I have to be strong for everyone. Strong for everyone. Emma Louise Duff on YouTube said after she lost her dad and granddad suddenly 4 years ago, she spoke to Jeff and read his book, and it really helped her. So there you go. That's very good indeed, Jeff. Very good indeed. This thing, Rosena, about having to be strong for everyone. You know, you're an A&E doctor. Everyone expects you to kind of be stoic when surrounded by all of this. So then for people, if you can extrapolate from that, people who take it upon themselves to be stoic, how do you then cope and process with grief? How do you kind of perhaps peel off that armor when people are expecting you, or you think people are expecting you to wear that armor?
Yeah, what a fantastic question, Nihal, if I'm honest. I think answering it as a professional first, when people come to you and they're having the worst day of their life because the person they love the most in the whole world is struggling and they don't know if they're going to make it through, they need to see somebody who they feel they can believe in, that instills confidence in them. So you have to show that you have got it under control, that you are doing everything you can for the person that they love, and that you've got yourself together. But I also think in the caring profession and in any, every profession, it's really important also to show your human side, because people always say, and if they come back to the hospital or if they send a thank you card, people love to be able to say that conversation that, oh, even the doctor could see how special mum was. You could see she really felt it when she was talking to us. And I think, so as a professional, people want to see that you can bring it all together in the way that you are doing the absolute best, and you instill trust in them, but that you're also sensitive. And I think in anything, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, if we think people want us to be strong and expect us to be strong, often I think as humans, we innately need to feel needed. And sometimes that being really strong because you're the head of the family, or you're the oldest brother, or you are the dad, or whatever, we're often, sometimes as humans, we can replace our grief with that need to be needed. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that of ourselves, because I don't think any family member or anybody would mind us showing that we are feeling all the feels, that we're feeling all the feelings, and that we're going through the same thing. And I'm very, very close to my brother. We are best friends, and we went through all of this together alone, pretty much. So the fact that we have each other and we allow one another to be vulnerable is really important. But then I often feel as a mum that when my two little ones are upset, that I don't want to show them that I'm crying about the other G, because I'm trying to get them excited about the fact that he's going to see their auntie's doggy in doggy heaven, and it's a really fine balance, to strike. And I think it's really brave when people try to do their best to be strong for everyone. But actually, I think the real bravery comes in showing that vulnerability and being able to have a collective cry or feel, or everything you need to feel, and to talk about it and to honor that person that you're missing and that you love with your whole self, however that comes out at that time. Because the danger of not doing so, and I feel very aware that I am among experts, so sorry Jeff if I'm saying something completely rubbish, but what I've noticed, that the danger of not acknowledging and honoring your feelings earlier on in the process can really lead to significant mental health impacts later down the line. People who try to squash it because they were trying to do everything for everyone, throw themselves back into work really quickly, busy job, haven't got time to grieve. 2 or 3 years later, people show up in crisis in the A&E having a breakdown, or personally, people who then might really develop an unhealthy relationship with drugs or alcohol, or eating issues, because they have tried to suppress for too long. So what I would say is, and particularly, I really feel, I'm sorry I've forgotten the name, but like the gentleman who lost his wife and then a few days later his daughter had a baby. How lucky your family are to have you. You are amazing. But I am certain that your daughter is really feeling all your strength, but I'm sure she won't mind if you had a good cry with her. It's okay. It's okay not to feel okay.
Jeff, how do the boys mark Jade's birthday? You know, these days that come around every year. How is that marked?
Yeah, so what we'll always go to the grave. They astound me each time with their willingness to do that, and I think the appreciation on their part that they know that it's right as far as their mum's concerned, and that it's good for them to do that as well. And actually, I've noticed over the years how they seem to want to spend longer when they're there, which is lovely for me to just sit back on the bench that's just set back and kind of watch them as they're just chatting away and supporting each other, and you know, looking after the grave and tidying it up and things. And you know, obviously I think in modern society we've learned that we can grieve remotely, and that we shouldn't actually tie ourselves to a headstone and make ourselves feel guilty if we don't get there one Sunday. Yeah. But yet being able to look after that space is something that's very special for a number of reasons. But yeah, I just wanted to also add to one of the biggest misconceptions in loss, without doubt, is that strength is suppression. You've explained it perfectly. Thank you so much, Rosena. But that what people need from the head of the family is for them to be the role model and to show everyone and set the bar and be like, actually, I'm really upset, I'm crying. So that gives permission for everybody else to do the same. That is the most healthy thing. That's to take the pressure off yourself to be tight-lipped and to, you know, and to get through it, you know, with some stoicism. You don't need to. No one's asking you to do that. In fact, that was something that was maybe conceived in wartime when there was more to come. You know, so I just wanted to dip back into that because it's really worth stressing. But yeah, we always mark the occasions by making sure that mum is at the top of the priority list on the day. Christmas is always the funny one. I think it's the worst. The first couple, we'd just kind of maybe hope that we could just get on with the day and that maybe we could just think about mum later. Very naive as it was. What we then realised is that actually mum has to be the first thing that we think about, the first thing we discuss, and the first thing we do. And once we'd made that gesture, if you like, actually gave us permission to then enjoy the rest of the day. So again, I'm pretty sure that would count for everyone. I really recommend that if someone's new to this grief business.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. So Shobna, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Rosena, thank you so much as well for joining us. And Jeff, thank you for joining us as well. Now, just some things to say. Thanks to Rachel Pinkney for producing and making this happen. And don't forget, if you're struggling with any of the issues that we've discussed today, please remember there are, as Jeff has said, no right or wrong ways of grieving. Whatever you're feeling is completely valid. And I think that's something that, in fact, I know that's something that all of our guests have said this evening. There's also support available for anyone who may have been affected by anything we've talked about tonight. We have a service called Talk About It, Mate. The details will be on the Facebook page immediately after we finish. So again, Jeff, Shobna, and Rosena, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for your honesty and your clarity. I think you would have helped a lot of people. Thank you.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.